Good day and welcome back to another one of our Lunch and Learn webinars. My name is Kobe Hayes and today I am being joined by Kirsty Pott and she will be taking us through using the work personality inventory. I hope you enjoyed today's webinar and over to you, Kirsty.
Kobe, thanks so much for being here with me today. And it's lovely to be here going through a tool that I really enjoy using, and we certainly have had some really positive feedback from our clients with regard to this assessment. So let's not go around in circles. Let's dive right in and start looking a little bit more carefully at the work personality inventory. So just for the purpose of this lunchtime session, and for those of you that are going to listen to it outside of lunch, what we're going to cover today very broadly is we're going to have a look very briefly at some background information. I'm sure all of you are very aware of how to go about it, but we're just going to touch on some issues that would link to best practice, how to use the tool as ethically as possible, have a look at administration guidelines, have a look at how you'd interpret the assessment, and then also very quickly have a look at a South African case study that we have. And I'll also make sure that you guys do have access to it so you can read it in a little bit more detail and see what other practitioners in South Africa have used the assessment for. So let's jump straight in. What is personality? There are a variety of different theories depending on who you're following or who you're reading at the time. But very generally speaking, personality can be described as patterns of behavior that would characterize an individual's reactions to the environment. We could also talk about personality as being characteristics and traits that would influence or help explain why an individual will behave in the way that they do. More specifically, personality traits are combinations of behaviors that would make up personality. They have tendencies to act, to think or feel in a certain manner in given circumstances, and they will distinguish one person from another. Although certain people might have similar behaviors or similar traits, not everybody is going to have exactly the same combinations or do exactly the same things in the same situations. We're all unique individuals on one level or another. Traits are also stable. They don't change over time, and they generally are the same across a person's lifespan. They would be measurable if you use a personality assessment, and that's exactly what we're going to do with the Work Personality Index. So now the Work Personality Index specifically is an assessment. It's a questionnaire that identifies personality traits that directly relate to work performance. They would help an individual identify personality traits that would help a person to be more successful in a specific career. And by being able to identify these traits, a practitioner would be able to help select in the right candidates for the job, perhaps guide individuals in career development or career pathing, and they could also help in terms of team functioning and also help individuals develop better as leaders. So the WPI does focus on traits that are important in the work environment. It measures personality traits from the normal adult population, and very importantly, it does not examine clinical or mental health related issues. Something to remember, this might be important later on when you're answering a quiz, for instance. As a result, low scores on the scales are not necessarily an indication of any pathology or anything wrong, but rather it would allude to different preferences and motivations that an individual would have for working. These different preferences and motivations would influence the type of work in which people are successful and also what they enjoy doing, where their strengths, where their development areas might be. The WPI assesses 21 primary scales that measure distinct aspects of work personality, and this allows professionals to make logical and informed connections regarding an individual's preferences and their work behavior. Every individual's combination and strength of different traits would lead them to act in a certain way in a wide variety of circumstances. So, for example, extroverted people would tend to be outgoing in most settings. You'd expect the same kind of behavior regardless of the environment in which they are. Organizations would want to identify an individual's traits to be able to predict how a person will act and react to the job. And with this information, the organization they can then select candidates who would have the specific or required traits that would be associated to successful performance in certain roles. So the WPI examines only those traits that empirical research has shown to be related to successful work performance. And this model is not actually based on any specific theoretical view of human personality, but rather it's a combination and an ordering of personality traits that have been shown to predict job performance. So as I've said before, it's not a comprehensive measure of personality. It does focus only on traits that are important in the work environment. It's not going to evaluate an individual's anxiety or depression, no clinical or mental issues. What it is going to be able to do is it is going to be able to answer the kind of questions that a practitioner will ask that might relate to what will an individual be good at, or more specifically, what will an individual enjoy doing. And this would then link back to success in certain careers or certain jobs. Very quick facts around the Work Personality Index that you need to bear in mind when deciding whether or not to use this in a battery. It is suitable for individuals from the age of 18 years and older. And so important, these individuals do need to have been in some sort of a job, and I'd say for at least 6 months, because work experience is very important when it comes to answering the items. You do need to think back to specific work experiences that you might have had when you do answer the items, so you do need to have that experience in your back pocket. A newspaper reading level is required, so a reading level of about grade 8 and up would be required in order to use the assessment. It is only available in either English or French. So in the South African context, English will be will most probably be the language of choice. For those who are wanting to use it, you can breathe easy. It does have South African norms. It is also on the HBCSA list if that is a requirement, that is something that companies or clients are asking of you. Also, it is untimed, but it does usually take around about 25 minutes on average for a person to complete, and there are 198 items that an individual needs to go through. The Work Personality Index will provide a clear framework for a practitioner to understand the impact of personality on job performance, and it will help them identify the key motivators and behaviours that will be driving an individual. And these are so important when it comes to hiring the right people into a job in the first place. What are their strengths? What is motivating them? What are the behaviours that you can expect to see of the individual? But then also going forward, once you've hired someone into a position, if you are wanting to develop them or support them into leadership positions, this information also becomes quite critical then. So unlike other personality assessments, it only measures personality traits that are directly related to the work environment and on-the-job behaviours. So please let that resonate, let that stick in your mind. It is quite important to remember. I know all of you do know this already, but just as a bit of a refresher, something to keep in mind. When using the assessment, candidates obviously are taking this assessment voluntarily. You can't force it on them. They need to agree. They need to give their consent, and this consent needs to be ideally and for best practice in a written format, so that you can keep that information, use it should you need to at a later stage. Your candidate must be in a normal state of mind. You don't want them taking this assessment under extreme stress, when they're overly tired, when they're not well, when there's extraneous issues going on in their environment. It is going to distort the results, as with any other assessment that they do take, any individual will take. You do need to inform the candidate of the purpose and the intended use of the results. You do ideally need to provide administration and feedback face to face. This is best practice. I do know, however, that there is a move to more online assessments where you do send links out to individuals. Something to consider if this is a route that you are going to take. All of these previous notes that I've mentioned or points that I've mentioned, how are you going to communicate these to a client if for whatever reason you are in a position where you do need to send out a link to a client and they are not going to be able to be sitting in a room with you? It is something that you do need to consider. The reports do need to be handled properly once you have received the results, just to ensure control and confidentiality. You need to know where that information is going, who's going to see it, and how it's going to be used. And then the client also needs to know this information. So who is going to get to see their results at the end of the day? When it comes to interpreting the results, you do need to make inferences from multiple sources of data. As much as the WPI results are going to give you a great deal of very useful information, you do need to use other sources of information to confirm your hypotheses or to corroborate the results. That is just best practice. Any battery that you use should be made up of a variety of assessments to give you a more holistic view of the individual. The WPI should also be used as part of a larger evaluation process, and the results from the WPI should be viewed as points for further examination. It's not the beginning and the end of everything. It's a point or a piece of the puzzle. Just in terms of using the assessment, you would use this. There is an online administration. You do have two options just with regards to the platforms that you can use to access the WPI. You can use the WPI on the Psychometrics Canada platform. Psychometrics Canada are the distributors of the WPI. Or alternatively, you might decide that you want to make use of the JVR online platform. This is our platform, and it also makes it quite convenient for you as a practitioner, especially if you want to use the WPI as part of a larger battery. Because if you do use our JVR online platform, you can create a project where the WPI is one of the assessments, and you can add other assessments to your battery, create one link for your candidates to use, which just becomes a lot more convenient for you as the practitioner. By using the assessment online, it makes it a lot easier for the practitioner as well, in terms of the fact that you can manage the process yourself. So you can create the project, you can send out the links, you can generate the reports at your own convenience. And then also the information will be housed on your platform. Should you need to go in, perhaps as a starting point, you decide that you're going to generate a select report for the candidate. Once they are hired, there might be a developmental plan, and provided you generate the report within a good time frame, you might then want to go back, generate a development report that you can use with your candidate, and you take that information and you just make the most of it. So once you have generated the report, what next? You're obviously going to then start interpreting the report. So there are a number of steps that you're going to follow just to get the most out of the information that you receive in the report. So the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to examine the profile validity. The validity of the WPI results needs to be evaluated before you proceed with the interpretation of the individual's profile. And when you have a look through the results, you might also have a look and see that a large number of either extremely high or low results are predominant in this profile. And this could indicate that the results do need to be interpreted with caution. So if you are finding that there are excessive number of either high results or an excessive number of low results, let this be a red flag, and start having a look at other sources of information just to see if perhaps this is an anomaly, if this needs to be investigated a little bit further. Specifically on your select and your job match reports that you're able to generate, and we're going to go into a little bit more detail about the specific reports a little bit later. But Specifically on your select and job match reports, you will find that there is a specific profile validity scale that you will have a look at. And this provides an indicator of the candidates who respond to the assessment in an overly positive or an unusual manner. We are going to discuss this in a little bit more detail when I take you through the specific reports. So park that as a thought, as an idea, and just know that your starting point when you interpret the results is that you're going to have a look at the profile validity. Once you've done this, you're then going to move on to interpreting the primary scales. Now, the WPI has 21 primary scales that you will have a look at. And what you're going to do is you're going to identify specific strengths, challenges, preferences, and tendencies for the respondent when you have a look at these scale scores. This is going to enable you to see what the job requires and whether or not the candidate may have the tendencies, or they might have the motivators, or they might show the behaviours that you're wanting if you're using the assessment for selection. You could also have a look at the scales if you're going to be using the assessment for development, identifying whether the candidate might have strengths, where they might have areas of development. What you're going to do is you're going to have a look at the individual's highest and lowest scale scores and examine these a lot more closely, since their pattern is going to relate to the work tasks that an individual will be successful at, the work environment that they're going to perform most effectively in, and also the types of tasks that they're probably going to enjoy more than others. If you are selecting individuals and you have developed benchmarks for that position, what you will want to do is you'll want to compare your candidate's style with the benchmarks to see whether or not your candidate is going to fit the role that you require them to fit. When you interpret the primary scales, it is so important that you recognize that the scores are never good or bad. They are only either more or less appropriate to certain types of work. So for your low scores, for instance, if you have somebody who scores low on the democratic scale, this would in fact be an appropriate score to have in an environment or for work that requires an individual to work on their own for long hours. If, however, you've got somebody who's going to be working in a team environment and there needs to be a higher score on the democratic scale, you would then need to have a look for that instead. So you always come back to your context, you always come back to the job at hand and to see whether or not the score is appropriate for that. So there's never good or bad scores, please remember that. Once you've interpreted the scale scores, what you're going to then do is you're going to compare the test results to other sources of information. Specifically when making decisions related to selection, or if you're going to be helping people with career choices, it is recommended that the results be used to guide an interview or a feedback session for the individual to come to a greater understanding, or for you to come to a greater understanding of the individual, and to either collate that information into a report or bring it out in a feedback session, depending on what the situation is. You're going to develop certain hypotheses about your individual based on their scores. But just remember that these are hypotheses. They're not set in stone until you've had the opportunity to discuss it in more detail with the client, or to compare it to other test results to see whether or not there's a pattern developing, to pull out that golden thread, as some people would say, to get a better, more holistic view of the individual. Importantly, and I've said it before, the WPI should not be used as the only source of information when making important selection or development decisions. Rather, when combined with other details gathered from different techniques, different assessments, the results from the WPI can add greater value, can add more information to the individual, or to an understanding of the individual that you're dealing with. last step that you're going to move to once you've looked at the validity, you've interpreted the scales, had a look at information from other results or other tests or interviews or whatever it is that you're going to be using in combination. What you will then do is you'll then summarize your findings and you'll make a decision, be it a hiring decision, be it a developmental plan, be it a career counseling process, depending on how you're using the WPI. And making the decisions is a really important step in employing the WPI. So you won't use it alone, you'll use it as part of a battery, as part of a process. It is going to enhance the either the selection or the development of individuals when it's used as part of a larger battery or a larger process. So based on the nature and the strength of an individual scale scores, you would have generated hypotheses regarding their appropriateness for various occupations or their hiring potential. And then these hypotheses that you develop can be followed up in interviews or with further assessments to identify whether or not an individual is suitable or not. If you are writing an integrated report, you would also then pull in the information from the WPI. You would then link it back to whatever competencies it is that you are hoping to earmark or pinpoint for the particular role. And you would use the WPI in conjunction with your other assessments to identify whether or not a candidate is going to exhibit the behavioral competencies that you're wanting to see. Okay. This is taken specifically from the report, and I think it really is. It's a great write-up that they do include, something that if you do use the report and with feedback, give to your candidate, or just something for you as the practitioner to remember when interpreting the scales. It is so important to avoid reading either good or bad into any of their statements. So depending on the situation, human characteristics can either be a strength or a weakness. If we think about something like risk-taking in certain situations, high scores on risk-taking would certainly be a strength. If you're an entrepreneur, or if you are in a team that is focusing largely on innovation, high scores on risk-taking would certainly be a strength. However, if you're as part of an auditing firm or a very process-driven environment, here high scores on risk-taking would certainly be detrimental to you performing successfully in your role. So it's always really important to interpret the scales within a context. So what might be an asset in one setting can certainly be a liability in another, and everybody does have areas of strength and areas that might require a development. So for a candidate, for you as a practitioner to remember, and also for the candidate reading the results, they need to remember that certain aspects will appear positive, while others might be of concern. And it's always important to have a look back. What is the context? What do we need to see? And if, for the candidate, they specifically say that if information does seem to be at odds with their own experience, they might want to discuss it with someone who knows them as well, just to get feedback from there. The scales are represented as 10 scores, so they range from 1 to 10. And what happens, and this is explained to the candidate or you in the report, is that those scores are compared to responses of a sample of other working adults. And we do have South African data, so our norm group is a South African working adult norm group. And then depending on where you score, you can either see, so a score of 1 would be considered well below average or very low in comparison to other people. A score that ranges from 2 to 3 would be considered below average or low. Scores falling between 4 and 7 would be viewed as average or typical. Any score of 8 or 9 would be considered above average or high, whereas a score of 10 would be considered well above average and very high. So just in terms of comparing or making a comparison to the norm group, scores that fall either from 7 and up or from 3 and below, these scores would show how someone is different to the sample population. Scores ranging from 4 to 6 would show how someone is similar to others. And the question that you need to ask as a practitioner or to include in a feedback session is, how do either these similarities or these differences influence a person's success or fit for the job? So now that you know how to interpret or use the WPI assessment, how you interpret the scores, let's have a look at where you can use this assessment. What areas could you apply it in? So in terms of it, you can see from the slide in front of you, there are a wide variety of areas that you can employ the WPI. You can use it for selection. Here you can help identify personality traits that would directly relate to an individual's work performance. You can also use it in areas of talent management, what motivates individuals, what behaviours will you expect to see from individuals, and how do you keep these individuals on board, how do you keep them engaged, how do you manage people so that they can use the best of their potential in a role to be as successful as they could possibly be, but also just in ensuring that an individual is going to stay with the organization. It becomes quite an expensive undertaking if you select an individual into the organization, you get them up and running, and something about the organization does not encourage them to stay, and you need to start the process all over again. In terms of coaching and individual development, the WPI can help you to identify, or help individuals to identify their preferences, what is going to motivate them, what areas they might need to consider taking a little bit more careful attention to and developing in order to be as good as they can be in their roles, also just in terms of developing their potential to the best of their abilities. The reports that you can generate do help individuals with specific strategies at a task level so that they can improve their own personal effectiveness. In terms of leadership development, the WPI can help an individual identify their leadership competencies, but also areas where they might want to develop themselves in order to be as effective a leader as they possibly can be. And the report that is generated does stipulate specific areas that they might want to work on to improve their leadership capability. Career management is also another area that you could use the WPI assessment. And here it would help individuals identify where their preferences would lie, and then also again what motivates them and how they relate or would potentially relate to different occupations and different work environments, in order for them to find the role or the area where they would fit most comfortably and would succeed most comfortably based on a better fit for them. And the last area that you could potentially use the WPI would be in a team building situation. And here the WPI is a great tool just to help teams resolve conflict, also to help them to improve communication amongst themselves. It's a key aspect of effective team building is to help individuals understand themselves as well as to understand other members of their team. And by using the WPI in a team setting, you enable individuals of that team to get a better understanding of themselves and others, but then also how to best lever off the individuals in the team in order for the team to be as effective as it possibly could be. Helping the team to identify where an individual might have a strength, where they might have a development area, how they can support the members of their team to develop those areas that might need to be developed, but also learn to appreciate where certain team members could bring a specific set of skills or specific strengths to the team environment. But always when you are working with a team and having a look at helping them to understand themselves, helping them to understand other members of their team, how to make the most of their team members' strengths, how to understand why different individuals are going to approach tasks or projects in a different way. you always need to consider the specific issues in that team. So a scoping of the situation is highly important. You also need to consider what the team outcome is need to be, the context in which the team is going to function. And with all that information, you can then consider the individual differences and the similarities within that team to help the team be as effective as a unit as they possibly could be. Okay, now more specifically, let's have a look at the different reports that are available. There are quite a variety. Many of them do speak specifically to the different areas where you can use the WPI. So let's start off just with the select report. So if you have a look here, you'll see the 21 different scales and how they categorized into a variety of different categories. So with the select report, it's a great assessment or a great report to use if you are going to be selecting individuals into a specific job or a specific role. And it has been designed to help match candidates' characteristics with specific job requirements. So the WPI, when you use it with other techniques and other assessments or other tools, it can definitely increase the effectiveness, the accuracy, and also the objectivity of an organization in their selection procedure. You will, when you use the select report, you will need to conduct a thorough job analysis just to identify what personality traits different roles or different jobs do require, and to be able to see what personality traits are going to be necessary for a person to be successful in particular roles. Once you have done this, you've done a thorough job analysis, and you know what you're looking for, you can then assess your candidates and see how they match up to that. Do they have the characteristics? Are they going to exhibit the behaviours that role requires based on the analysis that you have already done? So, for example, if you decide that you need to hire salespeople into your organization, you'll probably find that the candidates who tend to be more successful are going to be the ones that are going to score higher, for instance, on ambition, on persistence, and on the outgoing scale. So that you would have already identified before you administer the assessment. You've said, I'm looking to hire salespeople. I need to have a look at people who do score high on these specific scales, and then you will look a lot more closely at the individuals who do just that. So your select report is going to identify the best individuals for the role, and the report itself is going to provide you with a comprehensive and objective assessment of work behavior. How it presents, you can see over there, it describes a participant's approach to tasks, the way they're going to interact with people, and the way they're going to perform at work. And you'll see that there will be a narrative as you go through the report that's going to be specific to their actual results. So it's great. It does give you the narrative. It does give you a description of the behaviors that you're probably going to see or experience of this specific individual, which makes it a lot easier to interpret the report when you receive it. Okay, I'm not sure if you noticed at the bottom of the work personality, the select report, you'll see that there are two special scales. You'll see that there's the managerial leadership potential scale. There's also a sales potential scale. And right at the bottom, there is the profile validity that I spoke about a little bit earlier. Now, the select and the job match reports are the only two reports that have this information. The other reports that you can generate don't have the special scales, and they don't indicate the profile validity, so something to think about. Just unpacking these special purpose scales in a little bit more detail. With regards to the managerial and leadership potential scale, What happened there was upon a sort of closer analysis of group differences with individuals who had completed the WPI, Work Personality Index, it was noticed that there did appear to be quite a few significant relationships between the Work Personality Index assessment and also an individual's position level. The largest differences that were shown was between the management group and the non-management group. So what was found was that individuals who were within the management group tended to score higher on the scales of leadership, initiative, multitasking, persuasion, flexibility, energy, social confidence, and innovation, while the non-management group tended to score higher on democratic, rule following, and attention to detail. And if you think about this, these kind of results do make sense just in terms of how you would describe or how you would expect your managerial and non-management individuals to behave. But with this information, or with these findings, more research went into it, and it was decided that a managerial and leadership potential scale could be developed based on this information. So at an item level, it was revealed that a selection that 53 items of the 14 scales that were mentioned tended to discriminate quite well between the groups and the different possession levels. So the items then, when an individual answers the items, depending on how they answer those specifically identified 53 items, there will be a result on the managerial and leadership potential scale. Does this individual, in fact, have managerial and leadership potential, or don't they, regardless of whether or not they are currently in a managerial or in a leadership position? Very similarly, in terms of the sales potential scale, research using the tool also tended to or identified relationships between certain sales characteristics and scales on the Work Personality Index. So behind this, there was also research done using both the WPI and a sales personality assessment. And they were able to see that based on the results from this, that the Work Personality Index was able to discriminate between individuals who were considered to be highly recommended on the sales assessment, and also for those that were not recommended on the sales assessment. So with this information and based on these findings, it was decided by the developers to create the sales potential scale on the Work Personality Index as well. So the best indicators for discriminating between individuals who would be recommended or not recommended in a sales role were the scales on the Work Personality Index of persuasion, social confidence, leadership, energy, and initiative. So with this information, 50 items were selected from these scales, and they will load onto your sales potential scale and give an indication of whether or not an individual does have sales potential, and again, regardless of whether or not they are in a sales role or otherwise. The last special scale that we're going to have a look at in a little bit more detail to what we discussed a bit earlier is the profile validity scale. So this scale has been designed to flag candidates who might be manipulating their answers or might be misrepresenting themselves and coming across as in a highly socially desirable manner. So as a practitioner, you would use the profile validity scale just to identify people who might be misrepresenting themselves. You can also use this in conjunction with other assessments just to see whether or not this is in fact the case, if you're able to pick up similar behaviours or similar results in other assessments as well. So as I mentioned earlier, the profile validity scale is only reported on the Work Personality Index reports that are related to selection. So it will be the select report, and it will also be the job match report as well. So just in terms of assessing the validity, what you're going to do is you're going to examine the profile validity section of the candidate's report and assess the extent to which the questionnaire was answered candidly rather than in either an overly positive or just an unusual way. When a candidate's responses to the assessment are similar to that of most other job candidates, they admit to common shortcomings, limitations, similarly to other people, what you will get is you will get a text, and you would have seen it over here at the bottom of your screen where it says profile validity. It tells you that the candidate's responses to the questionnaire follow a typical pattern. Let's take you back there. If, however, there are signs of some sort of motivational distortion where it appears that the candidate has tried to make themselves appear a lot better than they potentially are, when it appears that they are trying to engage in impression management, you will get a text at the bottom that says that your candidate responded to the questionnaire in an overly positive or unusual way. Further verification to determine the accuracy of these results is recommended. So when this text is presented, it indicates that the candidate has responded to some specific questions, such as I never make mistakes or I've never been late for work, in an unrealistically positive way. We all know at some point we have made one or two, maybe 3 or 4 mistakes, and I haven't yet met anyone who has never been late for work, regardless of how timiest they might be. So we can see that it is unrealistically positive, and it doesn't necessarily fit normal patterns of behavior from an individual. So you can hypothesize that your candidate might have responded to the items in order to make themselves look good, as opposed to providing honest responses, although it doesn't necessarily mean that they are lying. It does indicate that the pattern is atypical. So what you want to do is you just want to interpret the report with caution until you're able to verify the responses through other methods. So this might be in an interview, it might be in a feedback session, it might also be just having a look at the results in conjunction with other assessments that you're going to use. So what you want to do is you do want to just validate or determine the accuracy of your candidate's responses, and before you come to the conclusion that the results are completely inaccurate, but you do just want to interpret with a little bit of caution. So just in something, in terms of that, your higher scores do indicate that an individual has responded to in a similar way to people who are trying to make themselves look good. Although something to think about and just to bear in the back of your mind is that research does suggest that your leadership groups do tend to receive higher scores more often than other populations. So just bear that in mind as you do interpret the results. While we're having a look at selection and discussing selection, I just want to mention the job match report. So the job match report has been designed to make your selection process much more efficient and a lot more effective. Ideally, you would use this report if you're going to be selecting a number of individuals into a role on a regular basis. And the reason is because you're going to identify on the system, you identify the scales that you're wanting to see in a candidate. You identify whether or not these scales are essential, they're very important, somewhat important, or just helpful in terms of an individual's ability to do the job. You also identify how regularly you do want to see these behaviors applied. And then over and above that, you also decide whether or not you're wanting to see higher scores, lower scores, or more average scores. So you create the benchmark on the job match profile, on the job match system, and then when you select, or when candidates are wanting to apply for the job, they complete the assessment and their results are compared to your ideal candidate, and you are given an indication of whether or not or how closely this individual is going to fit your ideal profile. Just something to remember when you do set up the job match profile. If you're going to require an individual for their scores to fall into that average range, just be very careful, because you're not going to differentiate candidates as easily, because most of your population is going to fall into that average range. So just be aware that if you're finding that you're looking for an average range on most of the scales, you're probably going to find that most candidates are going to be well suited to the job. So just keep that in the back of your mind when setting up the system. You'll be able to see there the job match report then spits out a report that will let you know whether or not the candidate meets the criteria, is close to the criteria, or does not meet the criteria at all. The next report that we're going to take a look at is the development report. This report you can use for individual coaching or development of people within the organization. And this report really helps individuals just to become more effective in their roles and become more successful at their job. It's designed to be used as a tool for professional growth, and it does also contain interpretive notes that are useful for increasing an individual's success at work and in life. It focuses on personal characteristics and behaviours that would influence how an individual performs in a work setting, and it also contains information about an individual's preferences, their strengths, and also techniques for increasing effectiveness. Excuse me. It has been designed for personal development and coaching, and it's just really, really important to remember to use this report to base your hypotheses on, but then to confirm these hypotheses with the clients going forward. Also, just to remember that there are no ideal set of results, and there's always good news as well as areas where an individual may need to look at developing or look at working on themselves. Change is the point of this report, and it's up to the client to make the change happen. And also just to bear in mind when using this report that each client's situation is unique, and to have a look and to remember their context, to remember their environment when working with the client. Also, so important with your client not to take on too much. Identify 2 or 3 areas that may need to be focused on, and to work on those rather than having a look at the report, deciding that there's so many areas that need to be worked on, as this becomes really, really overwhelming and can lead to your client giving up before they've even really started. And there you'll see that going into the report, there's some information around how the candidate, you'd expect them to express themselves, expect them to behave, and then you'll also see that there are personal development strategies for them to possibly consider if they are wanting to develop that specific scale going forward. The leadership report is another fantastic report that you can use when using the Work Personality Index, and it has been designed to allow organizations to assist the leaders or potential leaders as well to identify their strengths and common challenges in areas that are important to leadership development in order to be as effective as a leader as they possibly can be. This might include how they work with others, how they go about setting goals, how they might approach their work, solve problems, deal with stress, and also managing change. So if you use the WPI in leadership development, it will help you or help the individual that you're working with or coaching to increase their effectiveness, as well as identifying central issues to leadership and to effective leadership. So this might be where they can possibly leverage their strengths, where they might be able to develop their weak areas of weakness, and by addressing these, either developing this a natural strength or looking at working on an area of weakness, they will be able to enhance their leadership potential quite significantly. So when using this report, it's quite important to identify areas of personal strength, identify meaningful patterns for the individual, also identify skills and competencies that they could focus on in order to increase leadership effectiveness. So important when working in leadership development that there is no ideal profile. There is no ideal kind of leader, and each leader is going to bring particular strengths to their role. Also, the context is so important, just in terms of where that individual is. And that also needs to be taken into account, the individuals that they are working with, the environment that they are working in. As with selection, as we've mentioned before, it is important to incorporate other sources of information to make a more holistic development plan. But the WPI is a great source of information that can be added to this. So you'll be able to see over here, going into the report, the report will report per scale on the individual, their possible style, what their strengths would be, possible challenges that they might face, and then there are also action strategies that the individual would be able to put into place and work on in order to be as effective as possible. The last report that we're going to have a look at is the career report. And this report revolves around helping people to gain self-awareness of their skills, of their preferences, their values, and then with this information in mind, be able to identify occupations that would, or even roles within a current organization that would provide a good fit with who they are, where their strengths, preferences, and values might be. So the Work Personality Index can help individuals gain an understanding of their work preferences and then be able to link this understanding with looking into or moving into more satisfying occupations. The information gathered from the report is incredibly useful for individuals who want to identify potential careers, make choices regarding further education and skill development, or also within an organization, how to start moving within that organization to be as successful, to be as satisfied as they possibly can be. A useful tool for practitioners to use, also to help with retention of staff within an organization. If individuals are able to find more career satisfaction within that organization, there's a stronger chance that they are going to stay and grow and develop within the organization. So very generally speaking, enabling an individual to understand better who they are, what drives them, what motivates them. And you'll be able to see here in the report, it does give information on how an individual will probably behave, how they will be experienced, and possible areas that they can consider looking at, how they can harness their behaviours and what areas it would be best suited in. So yeah, it's a great tool to be used in the career process for self-understanding, learning about the world of work, setting goals and making decisions, and then pursuing those goals further on. There are, within the report, there are also exercises included in the report to help people understand their work strengths and also develop a plan for changing careers. It helps individuals chart their career paths, and also describes an individual's work style, their approach to solving problems, managing change, and then also dealing with stress, which is really useful when it comes to designing your career path. Bringing the WPI a little bit closer to home, and I will ensure that you guys do get this case study so you can read up in a little bit more detail. But we have had a client who has used the Work Personality Index incredibly successfully in the airline industry in a couple of different ways. So the one area was with the National Airways Corporation, where they're based in South Africa, and what they needed to do was they needed to find the right pilots and then once having found the pilots, be able to keep them. And the Work Personality Index was really very useful in doing this. The one thing with these particular types of pilots is that they quite different to, I suppose, if you have an average pilot, but these guys would often be spending a long time away from family. They were often sent into war zones. So in terms of the kind of scales that you would need to identify, it would be different to your average pilots. And the Work Personality Index was used really successfully in selecting people who could work within these environments, these more high-risk environments. So you can read up a little bit more about that. Also, just in terms of using it with your more commercial airlines, the tool was used to identify not only pilots within the SAF Air and the Airlink environment, but also looking to identify ground staff, cabin crew, pilots, and then once having identified individuals for the roles, the leadership report was used going forward to try and identify individuals who would be better suited to more leadership roles, and then also to find people who wouldn't necessarily, who might be paused for leadership roles, but results on their reports indicate that they're not that well suited to it. And this has been used really successfully in that role where there was a situation where an individual had been earmarked for leadership, had gone through the process, done the Work Personality Index. Their report indicated that they probably wouldn't be well suited to that role. And in a feedback session, this individual was actually incredibly relieved not to be pushed into a more senior position or into a leadership role, because they were actually really happy where they were. So it's just a very practical way in which the Work Personality Index was able to assist and to give a lot of valuable information to the practitioner. But as I said, I'm going to send it through. You can read about it in a little bit more detail. But it is used very effectively in the South African context. So definitely something to consider to add to your battery. But it has been fantastic having the opportunity to sit with you all today to go through the Work Personality Index, give you a little bit more understanding of the tool, where you can use it, how you can use it, what it can look like. But if you do have any questions going forward, please give us a shout. We'd be very happy to send you samples, send you more information. So thanks very much for joining us today.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. That was quite an interesting webinar. I'm very excited about all the different types of reports that are available that we can utilize. And I myself will also be reading that case study. It seems very interesting. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I hope you had a wonderful session and that you gained some insights and learned a lot. And also that you will be joining us again for another one of our Lunch and Learn webinars. Thank you so much. Goodbye.